The line goes Aaron, Phineas, Zadok, that's David's high priest. Then Joyarib is one of the descendants, one of the clans of Zadok and Phineas. And then, of course, down to Judas Maccabee's father. So why are we making this? And these are all, I think, that the Phineas line, the so-called Zealot line, is really no different than what we would call soon the Zadokite line after Zadok. There are different reckonings for legitimate high priests. And the whole issue, as you see in Maccabees 2, with all that squabbling we see in Maccabees 2, as I was showing you earlier, the whole issue is who's a legitimate high priest? Who has the right to the high priesthood? Collaborators? Hellenizers? People collaborating with foreign power? People not observing proper purity regulations? Or zealots? People of the zeal of Phineas, who absolutely follow the law to the letter? Or sons of Zadok, as the Dead Sea Scrolls will put it. Sons of Zadok is what the scrolls will talk about from Ezekiel. The sons of Zadok are the ones who served me at the altar, while the others strayed from me. So these two lines, I think the Phineas line and the Zadok line basically are the same name, different names for the same phenomenon. Now, in Christianity, what's Jesus? Hebrews, letter of the Hebrews. Not surprisingly, addressed to the Hebrews, because the Jews are interested in such things. If I was from Luxembourg, I don't think it'd be of great interest to me. You know, these minute questions of purity and who's the priest. You know, I'm a forest people from the Teutonic Knights or something. Well, what would that interest me? But the Jews are interested in it. So the letter to the Hebrews, what is Jesus? A high priest after the order of Melchizedek. And if you know your Hebrew, if you know any Hebrew at all, or can figure out a little Hebrew, you'll see that basically you have the same set of letters here as this one. Melchi is king, Zedek is righteous, king of righteousness. ZDK in Hebrew is always has to do with righteousness. Hebrew is based on three-letter roots. All Semitic languages are based on three-letter roots. Anytime you see ZDK, it's a variation or a spin-off or something to do with righteousness. Zadok is a name having to do with that. Zadik is a concept, the righteous one. Zedek is righteousness. Melchizedek, Melech, king. Zedek, righteousness, king of righteousness. So Jesus is a high priest, and the three letters are ZDK. So basically that's another variation. That's another variation. This one is based on a psalm. The other one is based on Ezekiel. The third one is based on Numbers. But these are all variations on the same theme, a righteous priesthood. A righteous, perfectly pure, as Hebrews puts it. Perfect and perfectly pure. I don't know the exact language, but you can read Hebrews if you've read it. You'll see what I'm talking about. Okay. So we'll see. I'm getting ahead of myself. But in any case, I think these are the same theme. So why is it important? Because in Dead Sea Scrolls studies, all the scholars used to say, I don't know if they still do, that the Maccabees usurped the high priesthood from a previously legitimate high priesthood. Well, that's their view, the scholars. There's no book that says that. And in fact, according to the Maccabees book, they're perfectly legitimate high priests. They are from a perfectly legitimate high priestly line. They didn't usurp the high priesthood from anybody. The people who had the high priesthood previously were illegitimate and not up to the task that they were exercising, and they took it over for the good of the people and because of zeal for God. And as such, they're just like Phineas. So the Maccabees one is making a Phineas claim for Mattathias, as we'll see in a moment, and for all his descendants. Now, these things sound complex, actually, but they're really simple once you get the idea of what's going on here. So when you see in Dead Sea Scroll Studies, the most famous scholar who said this was Cross, who used to be the doyen of Dead Sea Scroll Studies, and he still sits at Harvard, and he's got all his students around him who say the same things he says, and they'll dominate all the books that you're going to read. But their basic premise is totally wrong. See, they want to say that the scrolls are anti-Maccabean. Therefore, they say the scrolls are Zadokite, and they don't approve of the Maccabee priesthood, which they consider to be illegitimate because the Maccabees usurped the high priesthood. I think that's total nonsense. Nobody in this period, not even Josephus, thinks the Maccabees are illegitimate priests. In fact, Josephus is very proud of the fact that he's a descendant of the Maccabees, and he trumpets that descent. There's nowhere in his work that he thinks the Maccabees are illegitimate in any shape, way, or form. It's only the, I hate to say that, Christian scholars who don't find Jewish priesthoods very sympathetic given their own outlook, not Christian people, but Christian scholars. Christian people are very generous and open-minded, but scholars are sometimes closed-minded because they represent the tradition in which they're functioning. And they don't like Jewish high priesthoods. They like the high priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, and Jesus as high priest and so on. So all Jewish high priests are, to some extent, illegitimate as far as they're concerned. But we don't care what they think. What we care is what the Dead Sea Scrolls would think and what the Jews in Palestine would think at this time. And there's no indication that the Maccabees usurped anything from anybody. In fact, according to this book, in two ways, they're totally legitimate, right? The first way is that they're from the priest clan of what? Yoyar, which is the first and principal high priestly clan. Their genealogy is impeccable. Two, they exercise the zeal of Phineas. They have a double claim in this book to the high priesthood. Okay? You get it? Let's see how they exercise the zeal of Phineas now. So, here's his family. And he says he saw the blasphemies being done and all the horrible things and the foreigners controlling the temple and everything, and people slaughtered on the street and everything taken for spoil. All this from 1 to 10 of chapter 2. The ornaments stolen, slavery, freedom had become slavery. That's really important, freedom into slavery. Paul is very interested in the comparison of slavery and freedom. But you see, where these people are still very primitive, they think slavery and freedom have to do with political and national freedom. For Paul, he switches it around. Freedom is freedom from the law of Moses. Slavery is slavery to the law of Moses. Paul is a masterful polemicist. He always turns the arguments of his opponents against themselves. And I told you that one section in Galatians, if I didn't, I'm telling it to you now, where Paul speaks about the covenant of Sinai in Arabia, where he said the Jews are the descendants of Hagar, in Galatians 4, but we Christians are the children of the promise. We're the children of Sarah. We are the children of the free wife. They're the children of the enslaved wife. Therefore, toss out the slave woman. So it's all allegorical, but what he means is the Jews are slaves to the law, and we are free of the law. Well, it's fine, you can be free of the law. You don't have to impugn others. But he does all the time, and unfortunately, I already told you, I think a lot of his prejudice and hatred has corrupted the Western world, has seeped into the Western world, and made people knee-jerk feel these things just because they have never heard anyone oppose Paul. Well, you'll hear it in this class. I don't think his arguments are legitimate, and I think the methods he uses are totally reprehensible, and that he is a really scoundrel-like person in the sense of the way he uses people's arguments and traditions against themselves. He knows very well that the Jews do not consider themselves to be the children of Hagar. He knows that. And yet he's willing to say that to people who don't know anything different because he knows they're not going to read the books, and he knows that the Jews are interested in freedom. He turns that against them and says, oh, they're slaves to the law. And so I don't consider that way of doing business. I wouldn't mischaracterize a Christian argument in order to undermine them. I would try to be fair to them. That's why I don't consider him to be conscientious person. More like Al Davis or someone who wants to win at any price. Okay, so we've been through all that, but I just want to point out this freedom and slavery here still means the old way. And in the first century, it'll be freedom from Rome and slavery to Rome. Okay, now, Mattathias is in this place called Modi'in, which is down from Jerusalem, sort of towards the coast. He's left Jerusalem because it's been obviously totally torn asunder. And he and his sons have a shrine or some sort of place here that they are the custodians of. And the king's laws, they don't say which king anymore this is, but let's assume it's Antiochus Epiphanes still, although he may have already died. And they read a decree in this place that in order to be friends of the king, you have to abolish these ancestral customs. And Mattathias responds in this manner, according to this book, line 20. Even if every nation living in the king's dominion obeys him, each forsaking his ancestral religion to conform to his decrees, this is Hellenization, I and my sons and my brothers will still follow the covenant of our ancestors. That's the thing you get in the scroll. The covenant of the first is very big in the scrolls. The first in the scrolls of the ancestors. Heaven preserve us from forsaking the law and its observances. As for the king's orders, we will not follow them. We will not swerve from our religion either to the right or the left. That's also in the scrolls. That in the Damascus Document, you do not go from the right or to the left from the law. And then he saw, when he finished this speech, a Jewish person came forward in the sight of everyone to offer sacrifice on the altar of Modi'in, as the royal edict had required. And when he saw this, he was fired by, here it is, zeal to the depth of his being, and he gave vent to his legitimate anger and threw himself on the man and killed him on the altar. Not a very nice scene, but what's he being? He's behaving like Phineas here. So these priests are not very peaceful. Now I can understand why Christian scholars probably don't like these people. They're not very saint-like, but they are Palestinian. And at the same time, he killed the king's commissioner, who was there to enforce the sacrifice, and tore down the altar. And here is the comment of the narrator: in his zeal for the law, now we know what this means, he acted as Phineas did against Zimri in the wilderness. Then Mattathias went through the town, shouting at the top of his voice, "Let everyone who has zeal for the law and takes a stand on the covenant come and follow me." He then fled with his sons out into the hills of the wilderness, as you might, however you want to put it, leaving all his possessions behind in the town. And this is the beginning, according to Maccabees 1, of the revolutionary movement in Palestine against the Hellenistic incursions. Now, that's Maccabees 1. Maccabees 2 has a different picture, as we said. There's no Mattathias. But the interesting thing about Mattathias is the claim that Maccabees 1 portrays him as making. I don't know if this ever happened or didn't happen, I have no idea. But the claim is zeal for the law, and we know it's a Phineas claim. Yeah?
It's Numbers 25:6.
Yeah, no, we actually read it.
Okay.
We read it, we went back to Numbers.
So Mattathias is the father
of all the brothers, yeah. And it's a Phineas, so it's going to, therefore, the reason for this is it devolves on all his descendants. And finally, to the hero ultimately of this book, even though Judas is beginning to be the hero, is John Hyrcanus, the next generation, who Josephus will then tell us about in his work. We'll go to Josephus to find out about John Hyrcanus. And when we do that, we'll go up through the end of the Maccabees to the coming of the Romans, the coming of the Herods, and the Jesus period, basically, and then the war. So we'll get the whole history from this period on in Josephus. But let's finish this book, shall we? If we can. I don't know if we can finish it, but we'll do the best we can. Do you see that what's being raised here is that claim of a zealot high priesthood? So we get two legitimate claims here. One, genealogy. Two, behavior. So anyone in the Dead Sea Scrolls who says that someone thought the Maccabees were illegitimate high priests, just got to go back to the drawing board, because that's not how they were perceived in Palestine. Maybe some people who perceived them like that, or thought they had usurped the high priesthood, but there's no indication that that's the case. Anyway, so he goes out, and in Maccabees 2, how is this handled? Judas with 9 others went in the wilderness and would not eat anything but wild plants to avoid pollution, or to avoid consuming impure food. So it's a different approach. It says the same thing, only it's Judas who's the zealot, and Mattathias is nowhere to be found. In Maccabees 2, Onias is called the zealot. If you look at the beginning of Maccabees 2 here, when it's all these political strife that's going on in chapter 4. Now Simon, one of these pretenders for the high priesthood, was the informer about the money in the temple, and he began to slander Onias, the legitimate high priest. And Simon now had the effrontery to name the benefactor of the city, this protector of his compatriots, this zealot for the law. So here Onias, the previous high priest, is the zealot. Line 7 of chapter 4 and 2. Once Lucas had departed his life and Antiochus style of Epiphanes had succeeded, Jason, the brother of Onias, usurped the high priesthood from Onias by underhand methods. So, and godless wretch that he was, line 13, and no true high priest, Jason set no bounds on his impiety. So Onias was really is the hero for Maccabees 2 at the beginning. Though I think you'll find in the end of chapter 4 there, he's killed. He's taken prisoner. Jason had supplanted his own brother, line 26. And then they took this Onias to a place of hostage or something like that in near Antioch in Syria. And then Menelaus and other of these pretenders urged the murder of Onias, and this governor or whatever he was, or civil official, after deceitfully assuring him with his right hand that he would keep him safe, put him to death in defiance of all justice. So this saintly Onias, whoever he was executed in Syria, near Antioch, where supposedly the Pauline Christians grew up in the town of Antioch. Acts around chapter 10 says Christians were first called Christians in Antioch. And the community there is a Pauline one. I don't think that's where they were first called Christians, but that's what Acts says. And you can look at that and you'll see it in there. I think it's chapter 10 or 11. Let's go back here to Maccabees 1. Follow the history. So they all go out to the hills or to the wilderness or whatever, and then there's some people who are keeping the Sabbath in 32 in desert places. That's in Maccabees 2 as well. And they're attacked on that day, and they don't know that they can fight on the Sabbath, line 35, and they don't want to profane the Sabbath. Let us die innocent, they say, bearing witness that massacring us is an unjust thing. So the Seleucids pressed the attack, and they were slaughtered with their wives, children, and cattle to the number of 1,000 persons, this says. When the news reached Mattathias and his friends, they mourned bitterly for the victims, line 39, and said to one another, if we do as our brothers and refuse to fight the idolaters or the foreigners for our lives and institutions, they will destroy us. So then, he made the decision, if anyone attacks you on the Sabbath, whoever he may be, you can resist him. We must not all be killed as our brothers were killed in their hiding place. So now we have the first legal decision supposedly made by the Maccabean family. You can defend yourself on the Sabbath. You're not to launch aggressive action, but you can make defensive action, otherwise we'd all be killed, he says. That just shows how far away the Jews by the 2nd century were from being a warlike people. And how different, because I assure you in David's time, no one made any such fuss about fighting on the Sabbath. They never would have succeeded at all. So in the old days, I'm sure that was never even a question. They'd become sort of little nitpickers by this time. And they were not a fighting people anymore by this time. They lost sovereignty, they lost territoriality, and they lost the understanding of how you have to behave as a territorial people. Now, the New Testament has Jesus make a similar legal decision. I think his apostles are cleaning the sheaves from the field, and the Pharisees supposedly come and complain, why are your apostles or your disciples doing this on the Sabbath? And Jesus says, was it man was made for the Sabbath? Oh, no, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. A nice, clever statement, which is an interesting statement. But in any case, basically his decision has to do with the fact that they're perishing of hunger. They have a right to do the fields. So this is a similar decision to Matthew 5. When life is at stake, you can break the Sabbath. That's the decision here, and that's the decision portrayed. It's much more polite in Jesus, of course, and much more elegant in the Jesus situation. We don't have a lot of killing 1,000 people and all this sort of thing. It's a more elegant, Hellenistic presentation, but the decision is basically the same. And when life is at stake, you can break the Sabbath. Now, at this moment, they were joined by a community of Hasideans, line 42. How many have this, Hasideans here? Each a stout fighting man on the side of the law. Anyone have a different translation here? Okay, whatever you have, Hasideans, it doesn't matter. The word in Hebrew is Hasid. We have Hasidim even now in Judaism. And they are considered to be these religious people up in Long Beach here on Atlantic Boulevard who wear the black costumes. They're called Hasids, Hasidim, in Greek Hasideans. The word means pious ones. In Hebrew, Hesed is piety, Hasid like Zadok. Zedek is righteousness, Zadik is righteous one. Hesed, Hasid. I like to put two X's as a parallel to Zadik. I think I'm right there, but a lot of people spell it with one S. I think the two S's is correct. But in any case, Hesed is the noun, Hasid is the person who does it. Hesed is piety, Hasid is pious ones. They were joined by some Hasidim, some pious ones, each a stout fighting man of Israel. So you see, these are not, again, mamby-pamby little saints. Not that it's wrong to be a saint, but these Hasids fight. These are warrior Hasids. This is the first kind of holy warrior stuff that any literature really has. And what are they? Each a volunteer on the side of the law. So these people are big for the law and willing to die for the law and willing to fight for the law. And these seem to be an ongoing group that already joined Mattathias. They organize themselves in an armed force, striking down the sinners in their wrath, the renegades in their fury, the backsliders who had escaped from the pagans. Mattathias and his friend overthrew their altars, forcibly circumcised all the boys they found uncircumcised in the territories of Israel. Hunted down the upstarts. Man, does this book like all this? Yeah. Vengeance is being taken by the people from the law side against the backsliders and accommodators, others of that ilk. As the days of Mattathias, so that's the end of Mattathias. Then we're going to get his last testament here. Let's look at his last testament. I want to just do two more things before we go home. Look at Mattathias. Just keep with me another extra 5 minutes, okay? 10 minutes at the most. Look at Mattathias' testament here, and then look at the Hasideans in the Maccabees 2. Mattathias, his days were drawing to a close. He said to his sons the following testament. My children, have a burning, fervor means zeal, have a burning zeal for the law. Elijah is presented as having a burning zeal for the law. Phineas has a burning zeal for the law. And give your lives, martyr yourself, for the covenant of the forefathers of the first of the ancestors. I contend that this will be right in the spirit of the Dead Sea Scrolls when we look at them. Remember the works, not deeds, performed by our ancestors, the first, the forefathers. It's only translations. And you will win everlasting renown and great glory. Was not Abraham tried and found faithful? And was not that counted for him as righteousness? This is the basic passage Paul uses to almost create his form of Christianity. It's used in Romans and Galatians. It's Abraham's faith counted for him as righteousness. And And then Paul says that's how we're saved. We don't need works. Works being of the law for him. And therefore, faith in Jesus Christ saves. He just takes the next step that the faith being talked about is Jesus Christ. But that's not, of course, implied in the original passage. That's how he spins it. Maybe true. But the point is that he's using the same passage. The letter of James opposes it. Oh, you foolish man, James 2. Don't you know that Abraham was justified by works also? That Abraham sacrificed his son Isaac, or was ready to sacrifice his. He was tested by God, and therefore he was called a friend of God. It's all in James 2. And therefore that's how we're saved. Not by faith alone, but by works and faith working together. So the letter of James attacks the position of Paul on the issue of salvation by faith and justification by faith. It doesn't really say in Genesis 15:6, upon which this passage is based, that he was justified. It actually says that it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Paul translates that into Greek as he was justified by faith. In any event, it's a long story. I don't have time to go into it now, but you see the same passage being used. But who's next? Joseph. We don't even talk about the other generations. Jacob and Isaac are left out. He maintained the law in time of stress. Phineas, our father. The Maccabees' father is Phineas by genealogy. He had a burning zeal too. And he receives the covenant of the everlasting priesthood. So, again, number twice said. Then Joshua, conquest. Caleb, who conquered the southern part. David, his generous heart, inherited the throne of an everlasting kingdom. Elijah, again, a prophet with zeal for the law. And then down into Daniel, Hannah, Azarach, Mishael, and so on and so forth. My children, be men, be courageous for the law, and you will have glory. Here is your brother Simon. I know he's a man of sound judgment. Listen to him all your lives. So here's already Matthias appointing Simon. Let him take your father's place. So this book is pro-Simon, not pro-Judas. Judas is just a fighter, but not the main guy in this book. Right? Right there you have it. And here's Judas. Let him be your general, conduct the war, keep the law, exact vengeance, pay back the foreigners, hold fast to the ordinance of the law, and he died when he was 146. Yeah, sure, I believe that. In any case, now Judas Maccabee chapter 3 starts, and that basically picks up where Maccabees 2 chapter 6 and 7 picks up. But let's look at how the Hasideans are portrayed here. Quickly, let's turn over. We'll come back next time to finish this up. Thought I wouldn't finish today, but we're almost there. Chapter 7 picks up an important episode in Maccabees 2 as well, about Alchemus, another renegade who goes to Demetrius, who's now the king because Antiochus Epiphanes has died. And he presents himself before the king, and he's called by 9 godless, but he wants to get the high priesthood from this foreign king. And when he comes back, the Hasideans are presented as deserters. First among the Israelites to ask for peace were the Hasideans. They reasoned this way. This is an Aaron line priest, therefore he's genealogically okay, who has armed force. He won't wrong us. He will not attempt to injure us, and they believe him, and he arrested 60 of them, and he executed some of them. So this Alchemus was not a nice fellow. But here you see the Hasideans are presented as not really good supporters of Judas Maccabee, right? They're a fair weather, they'll follow anyone who's a legitimate high priest. But let's look at Maccabees 2, which has the same episode at the end in chapter 14. And then we'll go home. Let's look at this. Chapter 14. Am I going too fast for you? 3 years after this, Judas and his men learned that Demetrius, son of Seleucus, had landed at the port of Tripoli with a strong army and a fleet, and that he had occupied the country and had killed Antiochus, his tutor Lysias. A certain Alchemus, a former high priest who had willfully defiled himself at the time of the uprising, realized whichever way he turned, there would be no safety for him, or any more access to the holy altar. Therefore, he went to King Demetrius and tried to get the priesthood from him. Okay, this is a parallel presentation, correct? Right? Okay. Presently, he found an opportunity that suited his purposes. When Demetrius called him into council and questioned him about the dispositions and intention of the Jews, he replied, "Those Jews called Hasideans, who are led by Judas Maccabee, are warmongers and rebels who are preventing the kingdom from finding stability. That is why, after being deprived of my high priesthood, I mean the hereditary dignity, the high priesthood, I have come to you now." And so on and so forth. So, here, the Hasideans are presented as being the cause of the unrest in the country. They don't go over to Alchemus. They're not willing to recognize Alchemus. In fact, according to Maccabees 2, what are they? They are the followers of Judas Maccabee par excellence. They are Judas Maccabee's army. How are we going to resolve this conundrum? I do it in Maccabees, Zadokites, Christians, you'll see if you want to read that, but in the resolution of this conundrum, we will discover the birth of the Pharisee party. We will discover the birth, what you'll get basically in Maccabees 1, I will contend next time, is the birth of the Pharisee party. So in all these things, we're going to see how the Pharisees are born. And the Hasideans are not as Maccabees 1 presents them. I think they are as Maccabees 2. Unless, and this is the point I'm going to make next time, there are two groups of Hasidim. One, uncompromising. Let's agree to call them Zadokite. And two, compromising. Let's agree to call them breakaway, which is what the word Pharisee comes from, Pharisaic. So we have Zadokite Hasideans and Pharisaic Hasideans. One are loyal followers of Judas Maccabee, par excellence. The other are more accommodating, breakaway Hasideans who are willing to live with any high priest as long as he's got the right genealogy. Herodian, Seleucid, whatever. In time, it's my contention, and I'll talk more about this next time, the Hasidean part drops out, and we have two groups left, Pharisees and Sadducees. Both claiming descent from the Hasidic movement. See you there next time. Dead Sea Scrolls to me are the first group, the Zadokite Hasidim.